The cowboy slowed his horse the moment he saw her on the porch, a small figure sweeping in stiff, trembling strokes. The broom scraped against the old boards like it weighed far more than wood should. She didn't look up. She just kept sweeping, shoulders tight, head bowed as if waiting for a blow. He eased closer, boots hitting dirt as he stepped down. "You alone out here?" he asked. The girl flinched but didn't stop sweeping. "I ain't supposed to talk," she whispered. "Says who?" She shook her head. The broom kept moving. The cowboy studied her hands. One knuckle was purple. Her thumb had a cut across it. She tried to hide them by gripping the broom harder. "I asked who," he said. She breathed in quick. "Don't make him mad." The cowboy's jaw set. "Who's him?" No answer. She glanced toward the barn, then away, like even looking too long might bring trouble. "That barn?" he asked. She shook her head again, but her shoulders answered for her. "You waiting for someone to come back?" he asked. "I'm supposed to sweep," she said. "Just sweep. Don't stop. Don't talk. Where's your folks?" She looked at him then, eyes wide and scared, like the question itself was dangerous. "Please," she said. "Don't ask that." He reached slowly into his saddlebag and pulled out his canteen. "You thirsty?" She stepped back fast, broom held tight across her body. "No, it's water." "I said no." He lowered the canteen. "I ain't here to hurt you." "Everybody says that." "You look hungry," he said. "I said don't." "I'm just trying to help." Her voice dropped to a tiny sound. "You can't." The wind shifted. The barn door creaked though nothing touched it. The girl's shoulders jumped. The cowboy watched her eyes dart toward it, the way she breathed faster, the way her hands shook even as she tried to hide it by sweeping harder. "Something happened here," he said. "Something bad. Please stop. Tell me if you're in danger." "I can't," she whispered. "He'll hear us." "He who?" "Don't say it," she begged. "He always hears." "You're scared of a man in that barn." She whispered, "I didn't say that." "You don't have to." She kept sweeping. Every stroke was smaller, weaker. Dust rose around her feet like a little storm she had to stand in. "Listen," the cowboy said, voice low. "You need shelter." "No, you can come with me. Just for now." "No," she said again, harsher this time, but the fear inside it ruined the strength. "Why not?" She swallowed hard. "Because he'll know." "Know what?" "That I left my place." "Your place ain't sweeping some porch till you shake apart." "It is," she said. "It's all I got." He stepped closer, slow and steady. She tightened her grip on the broom like it was a rifle. "Don't," she warned. "I ain't your enemy," he said. "You don't know who is or ain't," she whispered. "But he does." "If he's hurting you," the cowboy said, "I won't let it stand." Her breath hitched. "Please go." "I'm not leaving you here." "Then he'll come." "Let him." She shook her head hard. "You don't understand." "Then tell me." She stared at him, eyes shining with fear she couldn't hide anymore. "I can't," she said. "It's already too loud." "What is?" She looked toward the barn again. His anger. "I'm not afraid of him," the cowboy said. "You should be." "I've known worse." "Not like this." He took one more step, close enough to reach the bottom porch stair. She pulled the broom tight to her chest. He held her gaze and softened his voice. "You need shelter." She whispered, barely breathing, "No. He'll hear us." And as he placed his boot on the first step, she held the broom like a weapon, shaking all over as he climbed toward her. He stood at the foot of the porch, the girl gripping the broom like she meant to swing it if he stepped too close. He kept his hands open, his voice low. He asked where her ma was. She said gone. He asked where her pa was. She said not to call him that. Each answer felt like a door shutting before he could step through. She kept her eyes down, as if the ground might protect her. He took another step, slow enough to give her time to stop him if she wanted. She didn't move. She only shifted the broom to hide her bruised knuckles. He pretended not to notice. He asked how long she had been alone here. She said she wasn't alone. He asked who else was on the ranch. She said nothing, only flicked her gaze toward the barn. She swallowed hard, as if the truth scraped her throat. He felt the shift in her breathing before she spoke again. It tightened, sharp and thin, like she was fighting something inside herself. He asked what she wouldn't say. She whispered that saying it would make it real. He asked if someone had hurt her. She said yes without nodding or looking up. He asked who. She shook her head so fast he felt the fear break off her like heat. A soft thud rolled out of the barn, low enough to question whether he heard it or imagined it. The girl froze. He saw the broom tremble. He asked if someone was inside. She whispered no, then said yes, then shut her mouth tight. He stepped closer, trying to see past the open gap between the boards. She said she wasn't supposed to look. She said he shouldn't look either. He felt the air shift again, heavier this time, as if something inside the barn leaned closer to the door. He asked if her ma had gone because of whatever was in there. She said her ma had left long before that. He asked about the man she wouldn't call pa. She said he lived in the barn now. She said he didn't come out during the day. She stared at the dirt as if waiting for it to split. Another slam echoed from the barn, louder, sharp enough to rattle a loose hinge on the porch rail. The girl flinched so hard the broom handle slipped in her grip. He reached for her instinctively, and she jerked back like his touch burned. He told her he wasn't here to harm her. She said harm wasn't the worst thing a man could do. She said silence was worse. Her voice cracked like it had been kept locked away too long. He turned toward the barn, hand drifting to the grip of his revolver as the wood creaked again. The girl whispered not to look. He asked why. She said looking made it answer. He asked what it was. She said it used to be a man. He felt the cold settle around them despite the heat. She said the barn kept him angry. She said the barn kept him alive. A low growl rolled from the barn, too human to ignore. The girl stepped behind him as he moved forward. He placed himself between her and the door, waiting for whatever might come next now. The cowboy stayed low as the barn door groaned again, the sound thin and mean like something watching from inside. He kept his eyes on the girl, trying to read the fear shaking her small frame. She clutched the broom against her chest as though it were a shield. He stepped closer and said, "You're in danger." Her answer came fast. "Danger, don't leave." He shook his head and reached a hand toward her, palm open, voice low. "You're coming with me." She backed up until her spine hit the porch post, eyes wide, breath quick and sharp. "He won't let me." The cowboy dropped to one knee so he wouldn't loom over her. He whispered, "No one owns you." She stared past him, not at his face but at the barn, at something moving in the dark where no person should be. He followed her gaze and saw it, a boot edge catching a thin sliver of light just inside the doorway. Not moving. Just waiting. He drew his gun in one smooth pull, the barrel steady even as his heartbeat kicked hard. The girl flinched and whispered, "Don't aim at him." He didn't lower it. "Who is he?" She shook her head so fast he knew she had answered that question too many times in her own mind. "Take my hand," he said again, quieter now. She blinked but didn't move. "Please." Her voice trembled. "He said if I ever left, he'd come for me. And for anyone who helped." The cowboy kept his gun trained on the quiet darkness inside the barn. "You're leaving with me," he said. "That's done." She shook harder, gripping the broom until her knuckles blanched. I can't, she whispered. The barn door eased open another inch, wood grinding slow, as though something inside was testing the air. The cowboy rose from his knee, placing himself fully in front of her. He kept his voice calm. Do you trust me yet? She shook her head. No. But you're the only one who's asked. He reached again, slower this time, hand steady, eyes never leaving the barn. Take my hand, he said, softer than before. Her fingers twitched but didn't lift. He's awake, she whispered. Something heavy shifted inside the barn, a dragging sound that didn't match any normal step. The cowboy tightened his grip on the gun. You need to take my hand now, he said. She pressed herself against the post. He'll punish you first. Let him try. Her eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. The sound inside the barn deepened, a low growl wrapped in something almost human. The girl's breath hitched. Run. He didn't move. He stood firm between her and the barn, finger tight on the trigger, ready to face whatever stepped into the light. She reached out as if to stop him, her small hand trembling in the space between them. He held his ground, refusing to give an inch. The barn fell silent, the quiet heavy enough to feel on the skin. The cowboy raised his free hand toward her, steady and patient, waiting for the smallest sign she'd choose herself. She finally stepped forward. The cowboy kept his stance firm as the girl whispered that someone was coming. He didn't move at first, only lifted his chin toward the barn where the shape had shifted again. A slow step scraped along the dirt, and the girl froze like someone had tied her breath shut. The cowboy tightened his grip on the revolver, already knowing who it would be before the man came into view. The foreman stepped out of the barn's shadow with a smile that didn't belong on any human face. He wiped his hands on his jeans and looked straight at the girl. You miss a spot on that porch, sweetheart. Might be you're getting lazy. His voice had a way of making air feel thinner. The girl lowered her head. I was working. That so? Didn't look like it. He glanced at the cowboy. And who's this? Another wanderer thinking this place is a charity ranch? The cowboy didn't blink. She's alone out here. I asked her why. The foreman stepped closer, amused. You don't ask questions on this land unless you got a badge or a reason better than wandering curiosity. He nodded toward the girl again. Kid knows the rules. The cowboy kept his tone level. Where's her mother? Gone, the foreman said, shrugging. World takes and takes. The girl stayed silent, fingers digging into the broom handle. The cowboy asked, her real father? The foreman gave a sharp laugh. Don't call me that. I just keep her in line. Sheriff says she stays where she is. The cowboy's voice dropped. Sheriff don't own her. The foreman's eyes narrowed. He runs this town. That means he runs what happens on this ranch. And if he says the girl stays put, she stays put. Don't matter what some stray gunhand thinks. The girl stepped back until her shoulders met the porch rail. The cowboy saw her flinch as the foreman looked at her, like she expected pain just from his gaze. The cowboy said, she's scared of you. Kids scare easy, the foreman answered. Maybe she needs a firmer hand. The girl's breathing hitched. The cowboy noticed the foreman's belt buckle gleam as the man's hand drifted toward it. He didn't know if the man meant to draw a weapon or something far worse, but he didn't wait to find out. The cowboy raised his revolver, aimed at the dirt a few feet from the foreman, and fired a single shot. The ground burst with dust. The girl jumped but didn't scream. The foreman stumbled back, face pale beneath the anger climbing up his neck. You out of your mind, he shouted. You take one more step toward her, the cowboy said, and the next shot don't hit dirt. The foreman looked between the revolver and the girl as if weighing which belonged to him more. Then he spit in the dust where the bullet landed. You just bought yourself a noose, stranger. I've heard worse, the cowboy said. The foreman backed toward the road, still cursing under his breath. Sheriff'll deal with you. Sheriff'll deal with both of you. Then he turned and ran, boots pounding the dirt all the way toward town. Silence settled again, but it wasn't a peaceful kind. The girl watched the dust trail fade, her fingers trembling around the broom. She looked at the cowboy with something between gratitude and dread. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. The cowboy didn't holster his gun. He stood steady, watching the road like he expected the foreman to return with half the town behind him. The girl stepped closer but didn't touch him, only standing where the air felt less dangerous. The barn loomed behind them, shadows unsettled by the gunshot. She looked at his calm hands and whispered, "He won't stop." The cowboy nodded once. "Neither will I." The words hung between them, heavy as the night coming in. The girl moved like someone expecting punishment for every sound she made. She kept her eyes low as she folded a faded dress and laid it in the sack. The cowboy watched her, trying to figure out where fear ended and habit began. He asked her if there was anything else she wanted to bring, and she shook her head. She picked up a small silver locket, rubbed her thumb along the dent in its side, and placed it gently on top of the dress. He asked if there was anything inside it. She told him no. She said it hadn't opened in years. She lifted the broken broom handle next. He stared at it, not understanding why she'd take something splintered and useless. She told him it was hers. That was enough for him. She kept glancing at the ranch gate as if expecting to see a shadow racing toward them. He told her again to breathe, and she whispered that breathing didn't help. He tried to ease her worry by saying they'd be long gone before the foreman reached town, but she shook her head. She said the foreman didn't need time. She said he needed anger, and he always had plenty of that. He told her he'd deal with the foreman if he came back angry. She told him he didn't understand what the man did when nobody was around. He asked her to tell him. She said no. He asked why. She said because saying it out loud made it real. He didn't argue. He simply took the sack, tied it shut, and told her they were leaving. She hesitated at the doorway. The ranch house behind them sat silent, but it didn't feel empty. It felt awake. He touched her shoulder lightly and said she didn't have to look back. She said she wasn't looking for the house. She was listening for him. They stepped into the yard where the horses waited. The sky was dimming, the kind of fading light that made everything look like it was holding its breath. He lifted her onto his horse and told her she'd ride with him until they reached safer ground. She didn't ask where that was. She only nodded. They moved out through the tall grass, and the ranch grew smaller behind them. She wrapped her hands around the saddle horn and kept her head low as the wind picked up. He told her she was safe now. She said safety didn't follow people like her. Night crept along the edges of the fields. The air cooled. He guided the horse toward the distant hills. She leaned close and whispered that he didn't know what he'd started. He said he'd finish it anyway. She didn't answer. A moment later, they both heard distant horses behind them, faint but real. They did not slow down riding. The sheriff found them before the road bent toward the low hills, his men fanned out behind him like a slow-moving wall. Dust trailed their horses. The girl pressed closer to the cowboy, her fingers locking into the back of his coat as if the cloth itself could shield her. The sheriff raised a hand, palm outward, as though blessing the air. "Return the girl," he said, voice steady, practiced, almost bored. The cowboy didn't flinch. He leaned forward in the saddle and said, "Ask her what she wants." The sheriff let out a small sound, something between a laugh and a sigh. "Children don't get wants," he answered, eyes drifting toward her face, hungry for fear. The girl shook her head and whispered, "Don't look at him." The cowboy lowered his gaze to her. "I won't." She swallowed hard and kept her eyes on the dirt, though her fingers dug sharper into his coat. The sheriff shifted in his saddle. "You're making trouble that doesn't belong to you," he said. "This is land business. Family business. Governor business. You think you can ride through like some savior and rewrite what's already tied up in ink?" The cowboy's jaw tightened. "I'm not here for your ink," he said. One of the sheriff's men stepped forward. "Boss, we can take her. He won't stop us." The cowboy's hand settled on his holster. "Try it," he said. The sheriff waved the men back with a slow sweep of his arm. "No need for drama," he said. "Just hand her over. Nobody has to bleed today." The girl finally lifted her head. Her voice came out thin but steady. "You don't get to say that," she said. "You never did." The sheriff narrowed his eyes like he was trying to remember whether she'd ever spoken to him that directly. "Girl," he said, "you belong on that ranch. You've got duties. You've got a roof because of me." She shook her head. "I ain't going back." Silence wrapped around the standoff like a waiting rope. The cowboy looked at the sheriff and said, "That's your answer?" The sheriff exhaled slowly. "You're making a mistake that'll outlive both of you." The cowboy said, "Then we'll live with it." The sheriff's hand dipped toward his belt. The cowboy drew first, not to kill but to warn, firing into the dirt. The shot cracked through the road, sending the sheriff's horse rearing. His men panicked, some drawing, some shouting, but the sheriff steadied himself with a snarl. "Get them," he shouted. The cowboy kicked his horse hard. The girl clung to him as the animal lunged forward, sprinting across the road toward the narrow line of trees. Gunfire chased them, snapping through branches, biting into bark. The girl pressed her face against his back and whispered, "Don't let go." He said, "I won't." They broke into the woods, weaving between the dark trunks, the sheriff's men shouting behind them. The deeper they rode, the thicker the shadows grew, swallowing the road, swallowing the voices, leaving only the echo of gunshots fading behind them like distant thunder. The cowboy didn't slow. Neither did the girl. They kept riding until the last trace of the sheriff disappeared behind the trees. The cabin door shut behind them with a soft thud, the sound settling into the walls like the place had been waiting for it. The girl stood near the table, arms tight around herself, eyes sweeping the small room as if checking for ghosts she already expected. The cowboy kept his voice low. "You're safe here." She shook her head. "Ain't no place safe." He took off his coat and hung it on a nail. "You need rest." She whispered, "Rest brings dreams." He paused, watching the way her fingers trembled. "Dreams ain't real." She looked up at him. "Mine are." He lit a lantern, its glow reaching only so far, leaving corners untouched. She watched those corners like they breathed. "Sit," he said. She didn't move. He softened his tone. "Please." She sat on the edge of the cot, the broken broom handle across her lap like a guardrail. He pulled a blanket around her shoulders. "Cold?" She nodded. "Always." After a long silence, he asked, "You hear anything out there?" She stared at the door. "Not out there." He frowned. "Inside then?" She pressed her hand to her locket. "Sometimes Mama talks. Just a whisper." He kept his face steady, though the back of his neck tightened. "What does she say?" The girl's eyes grew wet. "That he'll find us. That he's already close." He kneeled beside her. "Your mind's wound tight. That's all." She shook her head violently. "I ain't crazy." He answered softly, "Didn't say you were." Night deepened outside, the wind brushing the roof lightly, almost polite. The girl's breathing changed, quicker, sharper. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. "Hear what?" "Horror." "She's calling Dot." He listened harder. Only the creak of old wood answered him. "No one's here but us," he said. She hugged the broom handle tighter. "Mama ain't people no more." He tried again. "You're tired. You been scared too long." She closed her eyes. "Scared keeps me alive." He stayed near her, watching the shadows shift across the cabin walls. Minutes passed. Her breathing slowed. Just when he thought she'd sleep, she jerked upright and screamed. He grabbed her shoulders. "Easy. It's just a dream." She shook violently. "No." She was right there. She said his name. The cowboy held her steady. "Tell me who she meant." The girl's voice shrank. My stepfather. He exhaled through clenched teeth. He ain't getting you. She shook her head. Mama said walls don't stop him. A distant thud sounded outside. The cowboy turned toward the window, every muscle alert. The girl's voice tightened to a whisper. That was a horse. He stood slowly, reaching for his gun. Could be a drifter. She whispered, no. He rides quiet. Another breath of movement drifted in from the dark. The cowboy stepped toward the door. The girl clutched his coat. Don't open it. He eased her hand away. Have to. She breathed. Mama said he'd come. A horse snorted outside. He reached for the latch. The girl fell to her knees before he could catch her, her breath breaking in short, sharp bursts as if the night itself pressed against her ribs. The cowboy lowered beside her, one hand steady on her back, listening to the woods settle after their long run. She shook so hard the leaves under her palms trembled with her. He tried to speak, but the sound of distant hooves cracked open the silence first, and she jerked upright, eyes wide with a terror he could almost feel on his skin. He told her to breathe. She said breathing made it worse. He asked why. She whispered that breathing made sound, and sound brought him closer. He lifted her into his arms before she could argue, carrying her through the thick trees toward the glow of his cabin. She clung to his coat as if the fabric itself knew how to protect her. When the cabin came into view, she cried out for him to stop. He asked what she saw. She said she didn't know, only that something waited for them in the dark. He told her nothing waited in his cabin that wasn't already his. She whispered that maybe that was the problem. He didn't understand, and she didn't explain, but he kept moving because the hooves behind them were getting louder. Inside the cabin he set her down gently, but she crawled straight under the table and wrapped her arms around her head. He asked what she was doing. She told him she was praying. He asked to who. She said anyone who could hear her. He told her she didn't need prayers with him there. She said he didn't know who he was fighting. He told her he didn't care. She told him he should. A sudden shout broke across the cabin walls like a hammer. She yelped and covered her mouth. The cowboy grabbed his rifle and moved to the window, seeing shapes on horseback shifting between the trees. Another voice called out for him to open the door. He didn't answer. She whispered for him not to talk. He whispered back that they weren't asking. A lantern glowed outside, swinging in a stranger's hand as the rider leaned forward. The cowboy watched his own reflection in the window glass, calm only on the surface. The girl begged him not to let them take her. He said he wouldn't. She said they always took what they wanted. He told her that ended tonight. She told him he didn't get to decide that. He told her he was deciding anyway. Gunfire shattered the window. The girl screamed. The cowboy shot the lantern hanging by the door, letting the flames fall and scatter shadows wildly across the yard. The attackers shouted in confusion as their targets seemed to shift with the moving light. He grabbed the girl from under the table and pulled her toward the back door. She cried that she couldn't run anymore. He told her she could. She said her legs wouldn't hold her. He told her his would. They fled into the woods again as bullets tore bark from the trees. She pressed her face against his chest, sobbing that she didn't want to be taken. He whispered that she wouldn't be. She whispered that they were coming. He whispered that he heard them too. When her body finally sagged in his arms, he realized she had collapsed from fear and exhaustion, her breath gone soft and empty against his coat. She sat on the fallen log with her knees drawn up, staring into the dark like it held every answer she feared. The cowboy stayed a few steps back, giving her room, waiting for her breath to settle. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. "You want to know," she whispered. He nodded once. She rubbed her hands together, like she was trying to wake feeling that had been gone for years. "Then listen close." She took a shaky breath and stared at the ground. "Mama didn't leave," she said, the words barely forming. "He put her in the well." The cowboy felt the world tighten around him, but he didn't move. She kept going, voice thin but steady. He said she slipped. Said she died quick. But I heard her crying down there for 2 nights. She swallowed hard. When I tried to pull the rope, he caught me. Told me I'd join her if I screamed. She pulled her knees tighter, rocking a little like she needed motion to stay upright. The cowboy moved closer and sat beside her without touching. She noticed but didn't flinch. He told the sheriff lies, she said. Told him Mama stole from the ranch. Told him I was trouble too. She shook her head slowly. But that wasn't the plan. He wanted me working for the sheriff's men. Cleaning. Serving. Doing whatever they said. Her voice thinned again. I ain't stupid. I knew what that meant. He lowered his voice so it wouldn't spook her. You're safe here, he said. She didn't look convinced. Safe ain't real, she whispered. He turned toward her gently. I'm real. Her breath trembled. I ain't got nobody, she said, like she'd been holding those words back for years. He reached out and rested a hand on her shoulder, light as he could. You got me, he said. She blinked fast, trying to keep tears from spilling. Don't promise things you can't keep. He didn't answer right away. He let the silence settle, let her breathe. Then he said, We're going to someone who can listen. Someone who outranks the sheriff. She frowned. Who? He hesitated. The governor. She stared like he'd said the name of a ghost. He don't care about girls like me. He shook his head. He will when I put you in front of him. She hugged her arms tight. He'll kill us before we get there. The cowboy met her eyes. Not if I get him first. She wiped her face with her sleeve and looked toward the trees as if expecting the foreman to walk out of them. He don't stop, she whispered. Not ever. The cowboy shook his head. Everyone stops when someone stronger stands in front of them. She almost smiled at that but didn't. You don't know what he is. The cowboy leaned closer. Then tell me. She shook her head again. No. If I say it, it's real. He kept his voice steady. It's real already. He waited for her to speak, but her silence held something jagged. When she finally raised her head, her eyes looked older than any child's should. He said Mama didn't listen, she whispered. Said the well was the only place she'd stay put. The cowboy clenched his jaw but didn't interrupt. She continued, voice small. He told me I'd go down next if I ever tried to leave the ranch. Said the sheriff would help him. Said they owned every path out. She looked up at the cowboy, trembling. So if you're taking me to the governor, you better walk fast. He nodded slowly. Then we start now. She rose unsteady but willing to follow him into the waiting dark ahead. The ride into town felt heavier than the miles behind them. The girl held tight to the saddle horn, her breath short, her eyes fixed on the governor's building rising above the roofs like a warning. The cowboy glanced back at her. She was trembling again, the kind of shaking that didn't stop even when the wind eased. You tell what you can, he said quietly. She nodded without looking up. I'll try. He guided the horse down the main street. Folks paused to stare. Some recognized the girl and turned away fast. Doors shut. Curtains twitched. She swallowed hard. They know him, she whispered. They all know him. The cowboy didn't answer. He dismounted and helped her down. Her knees buckled for a moment, but she steadied herself. The governor's steps felt too wide for her small feet, but she climbed them anyway. Inside, the air seemed cold and still. A clerk blinked at them with a stiff smile that didn't reach her eyes. Appointment? The cowboy said, We need to see him now. The clerk's face softened just enough to look sorry. He won't hear visitors without schedule. The girl pressed closer to the cowboy. He said, This is important. The clerk's smile tightened. Everything is important. The cowboy lowered his voice. This is about the sheriff. The clerk froze. Her eyes flicked toward a tall door. "Wait here." She hurried inside. The girl's fingers curled around his coat. "She's telling him," she whispered. "She's telling him we're trouble." He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. The hallway felt too quiet. After a long minute, the door opened again. A man in a fine coat stepped out. The governor was older than the cowboy expected, with eyes that looked halfway tired and halfway bored. "I was told you bring a complaint," the governor said. The cowboy kept his tone steady. "The girl needs protection." The girl stepped forward but couldn't lift her chin. "I'll talk," she whispered. "I'll try." The governor folded his hands. "Child, if this is a family dispute, the sheriff is responsible for settlement." The cowboy felt his jaw tighten. "Sir, the sheriff is the dispute." The governor let out a long breath. "I don't deal with gossip." The girl flinched. "It ain't gossip." The governor looked at her for the first time. "Then give me paperwork. Evidence. Witnesses." She shook her head slowly. "All gone," she whispered. "Everyone gone." That was when boots echoed down the hall. The sheriff's voice came first, slow and smug. "Governor, you should not be wasting time." The foreman walked behind him, arms crossed, the same smirk he wore in the barn. The girl's breath hitched. The sheriff nodded at her. "Return with me now." The cowboy stepped in front of her. "Ask her what she wants." The sheriff said, "Children don't get wants." The girl's hand gripped the cowboy's back. "I ain't going back," she said. Her voice was small but clear. The sheriff's jaw twitched. The foreman chuckled under his breath. A long silence filled the hallway. No one moved. No one blinked. The cowboy leaned close to the girl. "Come on." Then he nudged her toward a side door. The sheriff barked, "Stop." But the girl slipped through the gap and the cowboy followed her into the shadows beyond. They were in the records room before anyone could catch them. The girl stayed close to him as he eased the door shut behind them. The records room smelled like old paper and stale dust, the kind that clung to skin. Shelves leaned under the weight of boxes stacked without care. The girl whispered, "Ain't nobody supposed to be in here." He answered softly, "That's why we came now." She nodded but didn't move until he touched her shoulder and said, "Help me find anything with your mama's name." Her breath trembled. "I don't know if I can." He kept his voice steady. "Just try." She stepped forward, hands shaking as she brushed dust away from the labels. They moved fast, pulling open drawers, scanning papers, pushing aside useless ledgers that meant nothing to either of them. She whispered, "He always said the sheriff kept secrets in here." The cowboy said, "Good. Then we're in the right place." She slid a box free, cardboard bowing under its own age, and set it on the table. The cowboy pulled the lid open. A stack of folded deeds slid out, each one marked with the same heavy pen strokes. "These signatures look the same," he said. She stared at them. "Mama never signed nothing." He handed one to her. She ran her thumb over the name. She never learned to write her own name. Her voice thinned. "Someone did this for her." He met her eyes. "Someone did this to her." A noise echoed down the hallway, a boot scraping. The girl jerked her head toward the door. "They're coming." The cowboy scanned the shelves quicker, searching for anything that looked official enough to matter. His fingers found an envelope marked with red wax. He cracked it open. Inside were letters between the governor, sheriff, and the foreman. Plans for land seizure. Mentions of threats. Mentions of the well. His jaw tightened. "This is it." She whispered, "What does it say?" He didn't hide the anger in his voice. "Everything you said was true." She blinked fast. "People don't believe girls when they talk." He folded the letters, slipped them inside his coat. "They'll believe this." She shook her head. No, they'll call it lies. He stepped closer. Not with me standing behind you. Another boot scuffed, closer this time. She grabbed his sleeve. Cowboy, please. He took one more paper, a list of missing farm workers. Her mother's name was written at the top. She stared at it like it might burn her. Mama never left the ranch. He said, they wrote it so folks wouldn't ask questions. She whispered, they buried her twice. Voices filled the hallway. Men were moving toward the records room quick and angry. The cowboy looked at the girl. Time to go. She nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. He blew the lantern out, plunging the room into darkness. She whispered, I can't see. He took her hand. Stay with me. The door latch rattled. She gasped. He tugged her toward the back shelf. Behind it was a small maintenance door left ajar. Through here, he murmured. She crawled inside first, squeezing through the narrow space. He followed, pulling the shelf back into place as footsteps burst into the room behind them. They moved through the dark passage, dust choking the air. The girl whispered, they know. He said, doesn't matter. She held tighter to his coat. It matters to me. He squeezed her hand. I got you. Light appeared at the end of the passage as they slid out into the night behind the building. The cowboy swung into the saddle and pulled her up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, clinging like she might fall apart if she let go. He whispered, hold tight. She pressed her face into his back. Don't let them take me. He answered, they won't. They rode into the dark, evidence hidden under his coat, the girl's grip never loosening. The ridge rose like a broken spine against the late afternoon sky, all jagged stone and dry wind. The cowboy guided the horse along the narrow trail while the girl held tight to his coat. She kept glancing over her shoulder, as if the shadows themselves might reach for her. He felt her trembling through the saddle and said nothing, knowing words wouldn't help her now. They reached the ridge's crest just as the sun dipped low. A hush settled over the land, too quiet for his liking. He sensed the trap before he saw it. A rider shifted behind a boulder. Another leaned against a crooked pine. Then the sheriff stepped out onto the open rock, boots scraping dust across the path. The girl's breath hitched. The cowboy felt her clutch at his side like she was trying to anchor herself to the earth. The sheriff raised a hand. This is where it ends. The cowboy kept his voice steady. Move aside. Give the girl up, the sheriff said. No. A long silence stretched thin. The girl shook her head and whispered, don't let him. I won't, the cowboy said. Rifles cocked along the ridge. The sheriff's men fanned out in the rocks above them, silhouettes sharp against the fading light. The cowboy slid off the horse and pulled the girl down behind him. She crouched low, breathing quick and shallow. Then the foreman stepped into view, his smirk carved deep across his face. The girl's scream tore out of her like something old and wounded. The cowboy felt her jolt against him, saw her scramble backward in blind fear. The foreman lifted his hand toward her. Come here. You know who you belong to. She shook her head violently and cried, no. 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 The cowboy fired first. The shot cracked across the ridge, echoing off stone. The foreman staggered back as the bullet tore through his hand. He fell to his knees, cursing, gripping the wound as blood spilled across the dust. The sheriff snarled, you're done now. Gunfire exploded around them. The cowboy pulled the girl toward a slab of rock as bullets shattered against the ridge. She pressed her head against his arm, whispering something he couldn't hear over the gunfire. Stay low, he said. Please don't leave me, she whispered. I won't. He rose long enough to fire 2 quick shots, driving the sheriff's men deeper into cover. Dust filled the air, thick and choking. The girl crawled along the rock's edge, trying to keep away from the gunfire. Her hands slipped on loose gravel. Her body pitched forward. The cowboy turned too late to stop the slide. She tumbled toward the cliff's edge, her scream slicing through the chaos. He lunged and caught her by the wrist just as her boots skidded over empty air. She dangled above the drop, kicking, crying out, "Don't let go, please don't let go." "I got you," he said, straining, pulling her up inch by inch. She clung to his arm as he dragged her back onto the ridge. She collapsed against him, trembling so hard he could feel her shaking bones. The sheriff shouted across the rocks, "You're making this worse for yourself." The cowboy held the girl close. "I said no." The sheriff fired, the bullet grazing stone near the cowboy's boot. The cowboy fired back, forcing the sheriff into cover. The ridge echoed with the violent rhythm of gunfire, each blast lighting the dust like brief flashes of lightning. Finally the sheriff whistled, sharp and angry. His men pulled back, dragging the wounded foreman with them. Before disappearing behind the rocks, the sheriff shouted, "You'll pay for this. Both of you." The cowboy didn't answer. He gripped the girl's shoulder and guided her toward the horse. She clung to him silently, still shaking, still staring at the cliff where she could have vanished forever. He lifted her into the saddle and climbed up behind her. She leaned back into him, gripping his coat like she feared the world might pull her away again. "We're going," he said softly. "Where?" she whispered. "Courthouse." The wind pushed dust across the ridge as they rode hard toward town, the last light fading behind them and the sheriff's bow chasing their heels. The courtroom felt colder than the morning outside, colder than the long ride that brought them here. The benches were packed, yet no one spoke. The girl stood near the witness chair, hands tight at her sides, eyes fixed on the floor until the judge told her to look up. The cowboy stayed behind her, close enough that she could sense him but not leaning in. She breathed once, sharp and thin, before the questions began. The judge asked her name. She gave it quietly. Then came the next question, asking what she wished to tell the court. She swallowed hard. Her voice cracked only at the start. He knew. She pointed at the sheriff. The room stiffened. Paper rustled somewhere in the back, then fell silent again. The sheriff shook his head. "She's lying." "She ain't," the cowboy said before anyone else could speak. The judge shot him a warning glance. "You'll speak when asked." He nodded and said nothing more, but his jaw stayed locked. The girl looked at the sheriff again. "You knew what he was doing. You knew what he wanted from me. You let him do it because you both wanted that land. You wanted everyone on it quiet." The sheriff leaned forward. "You're making this up." "No," she said. "You came to the house. You saw her. You saw what happened when she tried to fight back." The judge asked, "Who are you talking about?" "My mother," the girl whispered. "They said she ran off." "She didn't." A woman in the back gasped. The judge demanded silence. The girl's voice steadied. "They put her in the well. They told me to keep quiet. They said I'd go in after her if I opened my mouth." The sheriff slammed a fist on the table. "Judge, this is nothing but a story." The cowboy took one step forward. "Then look at the proof." He handed the stack of documents to the bailiff. They were placed on the judge's desk, pages marked with signatures, maps, purchase orders, and a set of forms stamped with the governor's seal. The judge read in a slow, controlled manner. Each page seemed to drain what little color remained in the room. When he finished, he asked, "Child, do you recognize this?" The girl nodded. "That's her name. But she never learned to write." The judge looked at the sheriff. "Explain this forged signature." The sheriff sputtered something about clerical errors. The judge didn't move, didn't blink, didn't bother hiding the disbelief on his face. He lifted another page. "These land transfer agreements. These payments. These missing persons reports you failed to file." The sheriff glared at the cowboy. "You think you can bring her in here and tear apart everything I built?" "She told the truth," the cowboy said. "That's all." "She's lying to save herself," the sheriff barked. The girl shook her head. "I'm telling you what happened." The judge raised his hand. "Enough. The room stopped breathing. The judge turned to the bailiff. "Bring in the governor." The door opened. The governor entered with a stiff smile that vanished the moment he saw the documents spread across the desk. The judge read from them again, slower this time, making each word land. The governor tried to interrupt, but the judge ignored him. When he finished, he gave the order. "Arrest them both." The sheriff lurched to his feet, shouting at the guards, calling the girl a liar, calling the cowboy a thief, calling the judge a fool. None of it mattered. The guards grabbed him by the arms. The governor tried to back away but was seized just the same. As they were dragged toward the door, the crowd finally found its voice. A low murmur swelled through the courtroom, rolling like distant thunder while the girl stood frozen, watching the sheriff disappear down the hall. After the trial, the girl wouldn't release the cowboy's hand. They stepped out of the courthouse into a quiet afternoon, the town holding its breath as they walked. She stayed close, her fingers tightened every time someone stared. He said, "You're safe now." She didn't answer at first. She looked down the road that led toward open fields, like she was studying a place she didn't trust. Then she whispered, "You sure?" He nodded, slow and steady, as though promises needed weight. "Yeah," he said. "No one's touching you again." She watched his face, trying to measure it for truth. Then, she said, "Can I stay with you?" The question came out soft, but it carried every fear she had held back. He felt her hand tremble. He said, "Yeah. If you want." She nodded quickly, as if the ground might shift under them if she waited. They walked toward the ranch, an old stretch of land he rarely let anyone near. The fences were leaning. The barn groaned when the wind pushed through its boards. Yet she looked at it like it was a place that might hold stillness. "Smells like dust," she said. He shrugged. "It's been quiet a long time." She walked up the porch steps and stood there, like she was waiting for something to happen. He opened the door and watched her walk in, slow. The house felt different with her in it. The rooms that used to echo now held breathing. She set her bag down and looked around. "You live alone," she said. He nodded. "Thought I was supposed to." She sat on a stool near the stove. He poured water into a kettle. For a moment they didn't speak. Then she said, "You believe me?" He turned. "Yeah." She studied him again. "Why?" He leaned against the counter. "Because you don't lie the way they do." She looked at her hands. "They'll come after you too." He said, "Let them." She shook her head. "You ain't scared of nothing." He said, "Not true." She lifted her eyes. "What scares you?" He hesitated. "Losing someone twice." She didn't understand the meaning, but she heard the weight. She said, "I won't run." He answered, "I know." Later she swept the porch, small strokes of the broom moving dust aside. He watched from the yard. She looked peaceful, though her eyes still searched shadows like old habits wouldn't leave. When she noticed him, she asked, "That okay?" He said, "Yeah." She kept sweeping until the sun started to drop. Then she stopped and leaned against the railing. "You think it's really over?" He joined her. "For now." She looked toward the road again. "It feels strange." He said, "Freedom usually does." She pressed her hands together. "Then what do I do?" He took a breath. "Live." She shook her head. "I don't know how." He looked at her softly. "We'll learn it together." She turned toward the door, then paused like some old voice asked her to wait. She reached for his hand, and he squeezed back, and in that small moment the future shifted. The ranch felt different after the trial, quieter in a way that settled into the girl's bones. She stood near the porch with a broom in her hand, but she wasn't sweeping yet. The cowboy watched her from the gate, his hat low, his shoulders still carrying the weight of everything they had run through together. Evening light stretched long and warm across the dry grass, soft enough that she didn't flinch at its touch. He walked toward her slow, not wanting to startle her, though she seemed far calmer now than she had on any road leading here. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded but didn't move. "I'm thinking, Dot." "About what?" She didn't answer right away. The silence lay between them, light and strange and new. He stepped onto the porch and leaned on the railing. She stayed a few paces from him, gripping the broom like it anchored her. "You ain't gotta talk if you don't want to," he said. "I know." He waited. She breathed shallow, almost like the old fear still hadn't fully left her ribs. He didn't reach for her, didn't crowd her, didn't say anything more. He knew she'd speak when she was ready. The wind carried a faint sweetness from the fields, brushing the porch boards, curling around her ankles. It felt like the land itself urging her to finish the thought she'd been circling for days. She finally looked up at him. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything," he said. Her voice shook. "If someone don't got a word for somebody, but they've been thinking maybe they do, can they still say it?" He studied her face. "Depends what the word is." She swallowed. "It's hard. A lot of important words are." She shifted the broom from one hand to the other. "I've been carrying this one a long time." He nodded. "Whenever you're ready." She stepped closer. Not too close, just near enough he could see the fear and hope mixing in her eyes. She lifted a hand but let it fall before it reached him. The hesitation said more than any speech. He bent slightly, not kneeling yet, just trying to catch her gaze. She kept staring at the porch boards. "You're safe here," he reminded her. "I know," she whispered. "You trust me?" She nodded again. "Then go on." Her throat worked as she tried to speak. The broom trembled. She set it down carefully so it wouldn't fall. He recognized the moment for what it was, not danger, not memory, but a shift inside her that asked for space. He lowered himself to one knee so she didn't have to look up anymore. She whispered, "Papa." The word barely made a sound, but it landed like something holy. He froze, breath caught in his chest, eyes burning before he could stop it. She looked at him then, waiting for him to reject it, waiting for him to pull away the way the world always had. "If that's what you want," he said. Tears rolled down her cheeks before she could hide them. She moved fast, stepping into him, arms wrapping around his shoulders with a sudden strength that surprised them both. He held her steady, hands gentle on her back, grounding her. She sobbed once, a sound of release rather than pain. He stayed quiet, letting her decide how long the moment lasted. "You mean it," she whispered against his shoulder. "I mean it," he said. "You got a place here. You got someone here." She tightened her hold. "I ain't scared no more." "I know." The wind stirred the ranch grass in slow waves, almost like it bowed to the two of them, blessing the new shape of their lives. The sun dipped lower, setting the porch in warm gold. When she finally let go, she wiped her cheeks and sniffed, embarrassed but lighter. He stood and brushed her hair back gently. "You wanna sweep a little?" She nodded, smiling small but real. He watched her lift the broom again. But this time, when she stepped across the porch, there was no trembling, no glancing over her shoulder for shadows that weren't there. She swept in calm strokes, the kind of quiet every soul hopes to earn. And she smiled, not afraid.